Well, good evening, everyone. Thrilled that the microphone actually works. This isn't always the case, I have to say. It's such a pleasure to have so many of you with us here this evening at the 22 Club, and a very happy new year to all of you. This is our first Beauty Triangle event of 2024, and it's amazing to see such a gorgeous turnout, so thanks for joining us. I'm Francesca Ogyeman-White, and I'm the founder of the Beauty Triangle. Now, we're here this evening to talk about skin and self-esteem, because I'm sure we can all agree how our skin manifests has an extraordinary impact on how we feel about ourselves. And whether it's acne, scarring, pigmentation, or even the first signs of age that start creeping in, there are still often simple solutions that can really help us to restore a sense of confidence in our complexions. Now, when we launched the Beauty Triangle, it was initially to educate consumers, but also to empower them to take charge of their health and well-being. But at the same time, we wanted to have the conversations that nobody else was really having in the industry. And to that extent, also introduce you to the most trusted voices in the world of well-being. So this now leads me very neatly onto our amazing panelists that we have set up here this evening, starting with Professor Faraz. He is a consultant dermatologist, professor of laser dermatology, I think the only one in the UK, which is quite impressive, and an absolute guru when it comes to all things laser related. So we're going to be hearing a lot from him. Also, Dr. Pamela Benito, she is an aesthetic doctor. She is an absolute expert when it comes to thread lifting, and she has a really interesting approach which really tackles the skin from the inside out. And finally, Face Restoration co-founder, oculoplastic surgeon, Professor Jonathan Roos, who is renowned for some incredibly delicate eyelid refreshing, and in fact, general eye area refreshing, which I think we could probably all do with at this time of year, Jonathan. So I think we'll have lots of questions for you. So this is our brilliant panel. We're going to have a little bit of time at the very end for some audience Q&A. So if you do have any questions for our speakers, do save them up until the end. We'll come around to you and get those answered. We have a goodie bag for everyone with some incredible skincare from cult Swedish skincare brand Mantle. So don't skip out without one of those. You'll be very sorry if you miss that. And hopefully you've all found a program and a referral card on your table or on your chair. You'll find information about all of our speakers here tonight, and you'll also see a referral card on the back. So if you'd like us to connect you with anybody that you hear speak, you can just tick the box next to their name, leave your email address, and then we'll do some connecting after the event. But I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to pass you over to our brilliant panelists. They're going to say a very quick hello and introduce themselves, and then we'll get started with our main conversation. So, Professor Faraz, if I can start with you. Do we have another microphone? Yes. We do have two microphones, excitingly.
Hello. Okay. This is the one.
It is working.
Is this working? Yeah.
Yes.
Hi. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Faraz Al-Niami. I'm a dermatologist, like Francesca already mentioned. I work in the TAC2 clinic, which is a very nice clinic in Knightsbridge in the west of London, and I also work in Harley Street. My main interest is laser dermatology. But as a dermatologist, I see also many of the medical cases of dermatology.
Well, thank you for joining us, Faraz. And our next panelist is Dr. Pamela Benito.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here this evening, and thank you, Francesca and the Beauty Triangle team. It's always a pleasure to join the panel. And I'm an aesthetic practitioner. I've been doing aesthetics for 12 years now. I'm based in central London. I collaborate with Doctor Clinic also 1 day a week. So I work with Professor Faraz and Dr. Wasim Taktuk, and I have my own private clinic as well in Knightsbridge. And I focus mainly in facial aesthetics, but also a lot of IV therapy, well-being, and also the thread lift, as Francesca mentioned.
Thank you, Pam.
I'm really excited about the questions we're going to get at the end, because they're always the most fun, so please don't hesitate to ask. That's why we're here. My name is Jonathan. As Fran said, I am a consultant eyelid specialist, so I work in the periocular area. I'm a little bit unusual because I work with my super talented colleague Rachna, who's also in the audience, so if I can't answer the question, please ask her. She's in a red dress, the only one, so easy to spot, or unless she's camouflaged. And I'm super excited to be here. I'm Harvard and Cambridge educated, and I've done PhD research, and I actually wrote it up as well, so I have a PhD, I guess. But that was a long trek, and yeah, I'm super excited to be here. So anything to do with eyes, eyelids, dark circles, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about Botox and a sense of self.
We're going to talk about all of that and more, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, it's a wildly talented bunch of experts that we have lined up here to talk about all things skin and self-esteem. So I'm going to start with you, Professor Faraz, and your sort of perspective as a dermatologist, because you see patients coming to you for all manner of skincare concerns, but what would you say the key sort of issues that really bother us about our complexions are?
Okay, so in most of the cases, it's the conditions which patients cannot simply hide. So things that are obvious on the face, so that could be birthmarks. So I see many patients with port wine stains, for example, but acne or rosacea with a lot of redness, or melasma, hyperpigmentation. And we often assume that things can easily be camouflaged with makeup. But first of all, not everyone wants to wear makeup. And of course, many men are not used to wearing makeup and camouflaging things. So in most of the cases, it's things that are obvious and difficult to hide, where they are often challenged or asked or bullied at school. And many of my patients, unfortunately, report that they were bullied at school and try and hide. And you can sometimes see that with the way they style their hair. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is when there are symptoms, if they're constantly scratching and rubbing because it's very itchy. Again, that's socially very noticeable, and that can impair their self-esteem.
And a lot of those conditions, certainly inflammatory skincare conditions, things like rosacea that you mentioned, that they're also often told to be sort of less, that they're more about managing them really at the end of the day, aren't they? So you can't always cure the skin from certain conditions, and I wonder if that sort of has an impact on the patient's self-esteem as well.
In a way, yes. But that depends on the type of patient, because you have a type of patient who understands the limitations of medicine, and also understands that many of these conditions are what we call inflammatory skin conditions, and they tend to be chronic in nature, so they can wax and wane, and there are times where the condition may flare up, and times where the condition will be under control. But there's always this chronicity where it can be long-lasting, and it can flare up at times. But there's also at the same time a lot of misinformation online. Where people are just advertising that things can be cured, and I had rosacea and I used this simple skincare regimen and amazing, and my rosacea completely disappeared and I'm cured. But they're probably talking about 1 or 2 weeks of what we will call in medicine remission, which is, this inflammatory skin condition is under control. And it's that group of patients who are struggling with the concept of this is never going to go away. Why am I hearing sometimes that it can be cured with diet or skincare? That is the struggle.
And I think the lens that we often view the rest of the world through doesn't help that, because we often look and we see things on social media, we see things online, we see things that have been filtered and airbrushed and photoshopped. And I think sometimes when we have these skin conditions that can be very debilitating, it can really reinforce that sense of anxiety when we look around and it seems like nobody else is really presenting with this.
Absolutely, and I think many of my colleagues in dermatology will agree that since Instagram became so popular in social media, I name Instagram as one of the social media platforms, but since social media became very popular, there has also been an associated rise with many of particularly the more younger, vulnerable patients who are much more self-conscious and much more likely to be bullied because they just look different and they're seeking perfection, which is very unnatural.
But it's interesting you talk about the younger cohort, because I also think as much as social media is a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because it can also be an amazing outlet for education. And so I do sometimes think that younger cohort at least are exposed to ways and methods, and hopefully if they get advice from the right portals, they can really enhance their awareness. Whereas sometimes it's the people that aren't on social media that might also not have the access to that sort of education and guidance.
Absolutely. It's getting on the right sites and getting on the right type of information and from the trusted sites, and that is the key thing. But navigating your way through the social media platforms and finding out which one is trustworthy, which one isn't, can be very, very difficult for many people, and even some of the practitioners might not necessarily know where to refer some of the patients to the platforms. It's a challenge, but I think forums like this that you're doing also help, because patients or relatives of patients would be able to then directly ask us questions and be able to give honest, evidence-based answers.
Absolutely, you've nailed it. You've done my pitch. Thank you, Faraz. My next question is very much about you being a professor of laser dermatology, because that obviously suggests that a laser is probably one of your go-to sort of modalities when it comes to treating a lot of skincare conditions. A laser is actually suitable for treating all of the conditions that you might come across, or do you have to be mindful of exactly what it is that you're tackling?
No, absolutely not. So the answer is categorically not. The one thing I always teach the residents and fellows who join me is if there's one thing I'll be able to teach them as a laser expert, and that is patient selection. Because one of the key things is to select the right patient who's going to be suitable for the right type of laser treatment. And unfortunately, again, there's a lot of misinformation. Patients assume because it sounds, high tech and laser, and there's a price tag to things, and therefore it must work and it must fix many of the skin diseases. No, it can certainly work in some of the birthmarks. So, for example, in port wine stain, absolutely, it can be life changing. My manager is here, and she knows many of the patients who literally their lives have been transformed because they have very visible birthmark, and if you treat that with a laser with the correct parameters and the right selection of the laser tool, that can be life changing. Likewise with rosacea, with some of the pigmentary disorders, but it's not a fix for everything, and that's when things go wrong, when the patient selection is incorrect.
No, I understand that 100%. And what about the sort of residual side effects of a lot of these conditions? You mentioned acne right at the beginning, and I often think that the troubling thing about acne is not just when it manifests on the face initially in the skin, but almost what comes afterwards when you get the associated scarring. Is that something that you sort of see a lot of and that you're tackling a lot in clinic?
Absolutely, and I think that is a failure of how some of our colleagues in the National Health Service view acne. I know there's a colleague, consultant dermatologist, in the panel as well, because traditionally the focus was just on the inflammatory component, and that is just treating the spots, and then we don't care about the rest because what comes afterwards is deemed cosmetic. But it's actually what comes afterwards which bothers patients most of the time, which is the scarring or this persistent residual redness, which we call post-acne erythema, or in the higher skin types, in Asian skin type, they get residual pigmentation. And textbook tells you it will disappear in 6 months, but that's nonsense. It can last on for years, and there's a publication recently from Thailand that it shows that on average it lasts 6 to 7 years. So you can't tell someone who's 17 years old, who's very, who's at the formative time of their years, well, you'll have to wait 7 years because that's the average when the pigmentation is going to disappear. So I think that's absolutely important, that we don't just stop by what we see as the inflammatory condition, but it's also the aftermath.
It's so true. I know if I see a spot manifesting, I sort of do an inward sigh because it's not only going to ruin my week and everything that I have planned, but I also know I'm going to see that pigment on my face for the next few years. And I definitely have sort of blemishes that have been hanging around since my teenage years. So I think you're absolutely right. The sort of longevity is often undersold. What can we actually do if we are sort of approaching laser treatment, if we are looking for sort of skin optimization? Is there anything we can do ourselves at home to almost prepare the skin and optimize it so that these treatments might be more effective for us?
I mean, this is a broad question. It depends on the type of laser and the type of treatment. But to keep things simple, many of the lasers will increase the sensitivity to sunlight. And depending on some of the lasers within the wavelength that is highly absorbed by the melanin, which is the pigment, the one thing you can do is to use a sunblock and make sure that you're not actively tanned at the time of the laser treatment. Now that doesn't necessarily apply to all the laser treatments and the energy-based devices, but for many of the laser treatments, in, let's say in the aesthetic arena. So what you can do is hydrate the skin and protect the skin from the sunlight using a sunblock, and make sure that you don't have an active tan if you have a laser treatment. The rest depends on the type of laser, but that would be the best advice I could give.
What's the laser that you use the most right now in clinic? Because also January is a great time for us to be doing laser treatment, right? Hopefully most of us, unless you were lucky enough to go somewhere hot and sunny over Christmas.
I mean, the answer is very, very clear, and that is vascular lasers. I am well known for my skill in vascular treatments. So I see a lot of port wine stains, a lot of rosacea, and a lot of blood vessel anomalies, shall we say. So the most that I use would be the vascular laser.
So this could even be relevant for somebody who just has a lot of sort of pinkness, redness across the cheeks, who flushes easily, who looks a little bit weather beaten sometimes.
Correct, and it's a common problem in the UK.
Definitely.
And it's not just among the fair skin types. the so-called higher skin types or the Asian skin type can also suffer from that, but it's often a little bit less visible and requires a good history and examination to actually discern that.
And I think you're so right about sort of the corrective history taking, the consultation process and really getting under the skin, sorry, excuse the pun, that came out so naturally, of the patient as well before you prescribe the sort of course of treatment. But what about the sort of lifestyle amends as well? Is there anything that you sort of, as a general rule, everyone can take this away at home and sort of benefit from this knowledge that you recommend to patients?
Well, I think I'm going to have to answer this slightly differently and go back to what you just mentioned, which is getting the right history taking, because I see a lot of also misdiagnosis.
Yeah.
Because not every red face equals rosacea. There's a whole list of differential diagnoses. Rosacea is one of the commonest, that is correct, but you have many other conditions. And there are some relatively common conditions like seborrheic dermatitis, where patients can have redness, facial redness, but they often have one particular type of scaling, and often it involves the eyelids and the eyebrows, so my colleague will also see that. But you also have acne that can sometimes look similar to rosacea, but it's not rosacea, and it's more of post-acne erythema. So getting the right diagnosis is absolutely vital, because you will be able to then steer the patient into the right direction in terms of advice and treatment. But if we just keep it simple and talk, for example, about acne and rosacea, we also know that there's a link with the diet. We know that there's a link with the gut. There's a link with the environment. So for those patients, for example, over the last few years, we know that patients with rosacea who have gut symptoms, so bloating, acid reflux, stomach pains, we do encourage them to have specific testing. So there's something called SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, Helicobacter pylori. These are some of the infections in the gut that can also be indirectly linked to some of the flare-ups of rosacea. And again, I have to be very clear, it's not, some patients take it to the extreme and avoid any topical treatment for rosacea, and they just go down the routes of the diet and the gut. That is unfortunate, because you also need topical therapy.
Well, I think some people sometimes are so scarred by a bad experience, and they just, I know my mother, for example, has rosacea, and she'll often say, no, I'm not even doing that facial. I know it says it's simple, it's gentle. I know my skin will flare up. And I think people are just, we're busy, we have a lot to do, we know how we want to present ourselves to the world. Sometimes we just don't want to take that risk.
Yes, but that's, and again, that is finding the right practitioner that you trust. It's very important that you have mutual trust between the doctor and the patient, and getting the right information. But to answer your question, I think sleep disturbances are an issue, stress. So if you can manage stress, if you can sleep well, if you hydrate yourself, if you can reduce systemic inflammation by eating healthy, fiber-rich diets, if you have any gut issues, you correct them. I think you're on the right path of helping yourself with clearing the skin. The rest is down to us. Sometimes you need to have a medical approach, whether it's a topical treatment or a systemic treatment, what we call tablets. It cannot always be just organic and natural. Sometimes you need to fix things.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, and a really sort of good note to summarise that on. Thank you, Faraz, that was fascinating. And if you do have any questions for Professor Faraz at the end of the conversation, do save them up and we'll come to you then. But yeah, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom with us, Faraz. That was really fascinating. And so our next wonderful speaker is Dr. Pamela Benito. She's already introduced herself, but she is an absolute expert with threads, aesthetic medicine in general, and she also does some fascinating things with IV infusions and supplementation, which we're going to find all about. But Pam, maybe we can start with a little bit about you, because I'd love to know what actually being confident in your complexion means to you personally, both as a doctor, but I suppose also as a patient in a way.
It is. So, funny enough, I'm one of Professor Faraz's patients. He's been my dermatologist for about 4 years now.
I genuinely didn't know that until we started planning this talk. So, I mean, that means we're all in sync, which is great.
So, I've, for people who don't know me or they don't know me well enough, I've suffered from atopic dermatitis since I was a little girl. So, being a patient myself, I have a lot of empathy, I guess, with a lot of skin conditions. And even when patients come in through the door for injectables, I still look at their skin quality, their condition. And for me, it's important to give them that confidence back, because I'm the first one that if my skin is not looking great or is flared up, I don't want to go out. I don't want to, be seen by people. And like you were mentioning earlier, you've been bullied at school, so it takes time. You have to work, with the skin and trying to look at the inside as well, like Professor was saying, diet, lifestyle, the gut, supplementation and so on, but also sometimes the topical side of things.
And what did you find was the sort of main thing that enabled your skin to turn a corner? Obviously you're under Professor Faraz's amazing guidance and his wing, but was it a sort of combination approach? Was it a variety of different things that you were trying, a bit of the nutrition, a bit of the supplementation and whatnot?
It is a combination, absolutely. So I've, even to a point years ago, just decided myself to do like a diary of my diet, and whenever I flare up, I'll see what I've eaten. And
that's a great idea.
I actually came out to a conclusion that I couldn't have aubergines and tomatoes. And a few years later, actually, I met a nutritionist, and he said that's definitely a no-no for any sort of eczema. So tomato, aubergine, peppers, potatoes, all the night. So that made a big difference. Also, when I stopped dairy at the time, about 20 years ago, that made a big difference. But still, because it's an autoimmune disorder, I know that it's not going to be cured.
Yeah.
And funny enough, Professor was the first dermatologist ever to say that to me. So for me,
that it wasn't curable in such a sense, yeah.
And not just give me some.
I'm sorry. Sometimes honesty is not necessary.
Honesty is great.
That was a bright day for you.
But I think that gives you, again, like we we're just saying, the trust and the confidence in a practitioner, that they really understand that it's not just how it looks, but also the suffering of is sore, is painful, is itchy, and so on. And every other dermatologist in Dallas would say, well, we'll put you on a steroids, give you some...
But because that is often the answer, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, when you sort of do see a dermatologist.
Yes, and again, sometimes you do need it for a week or so, but you don't want to be in the long term and then have some withdrawal as well. And again, just work from the inside, your diet, look at things that might potentially not agree with you, skincare, IV therapy, of course, I'm a big fan myself, sublingual supplements, and also, obviously, if I have to do some allergy tests, everyone like we were discussing earlier, I'm always trying to see what I can do to help it.
It's really nice to hear, and I'm sure Jonathan will also agree when we come to talk to him, but that everyone is already on a sort of similar pathway and in understanding what the patient is ultimately presenting with, understanding what is going on, with their skin at a sort of root level as well, and then really sort of trying to create a personalised, bespoke map to managing that. What do you do when you're faced with a patient and they just want to sort of get their skin sort of fresh and glowy and sort of optimal right from the moment they come in, and you've made sure that everything is in the right place and there are no inflammatory skincare conditions and they just want to look fantastic for January?
I would probably say then if there's no skin conditions or they're under control, if that makes sense, then we'll look at hydration, resurfacing the skin, especially now in the winter. A lot of patients coming in for a hydrofacial with chemical peel, microneedling, so stimulating collagen, really focusing on that hydration, plumping up the skin. And I'm a big fan also, I do a lot of skin booster treatment. So again, it's an injectable, but it's mainly to improve the skin quality, the elasticity,
and this is pure hyaluronic acid that you're injecting?
Yes.
And sort of multiple sites all across the face when you do this?
Face, neck, décolletage, hands. I've even treated patients on their knees because they wanted more hydrated and plump.
Well, as soon as you see the benefits it has on the face, you're like, do everywhere.
Everywhere. Like, where do you stop?
Yeah.
But I think because it's combined, the hyaluronic acid is combined with vitamins, amino acids, and antioxidants, you really get that extra boost and really get the skin glow.
Yeah, and I think also a lot of patients are looking for that sort of rejuvenation at this time of year as well, when we're all looking a little bit grey and forlorn. Tell me a little bit about the IV drips that you do. How do they benefit the patient who is sort of really struggling with their skin?
So I think we can obviously give them certain benefits, even though you still look at other ways of improving it. But with the IV therapy, and I've been doing IV therapy for about 8 to 9 years now, there's certain ingredients that will definitely help directly the skin. So we use vitamin C, glutathione, high strength, They're both powerful antioxidants, so it will help with free radicals and slowing the aging process. To even magnesium, vitamin B12. I think it's sometimes the combination of ingredients that really help. But at the same time, there is the side of NAD. So if you're familiar with NAD,
This is a big buzzword right now,
It's-
the NAD.
um,
Is that a drip that you offer, the NAD?
I don't offer the drip anymore, only because sometimes it can make people quite unwell. They
Feel a bit unwell,
nausea.
yeah.
So I focus more with sublingual supplements in terms of NAD, and
what are sublingual supplements, just to...
So basically, the idea of a sublingual supplement, instead of taking a tablet where there's going to be the digestion process and it's going to break down, and a lot of it is going to be going to waste, sublingual goes straight into the bloodstream. So when we put the supplements under the tongue, we keep it there for about 90 seconds before we swallow. That goes directly into the bloodstream. So it's almost as if you were doing IV therapy, but on a daily basis at home. And reduce also people who have sometimes very sensitive stomach, and they're going to have a little bit of upset stomach with so many tablets and supplements. And the absorption is at 90%, whereas when you take tablets, capsules, it's about a 15-20%.
That's really interesting. And with the IV drips, are you able to do other things at the same time? Because often you're then sort of hooked up to a drip for a while, aren't you? And you do some other incredible skin treatments. I mean, do you ever find yourself combining them, sort of doing things all at the same time? Because that sounds wonderfully time-saving.
Yeah, I think it depends on the patient. Some patients want to come in for an IV drip, have the lights off and close their eyes and almost have, a little nap on the first time that they fall asleep, especially because magnesium can be quite relaxing.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's fine if patients want to just close their eyes and relax, absolutely fine. And some patients want to have at the same time toxin, fillers, skin booster, chemical peel. So the IV therapy will take normally 30 to 45 minutes, so you have plenty of time to do other treatments.
And do you often use these sort of, the drips, the supplementation, as a way to even prepare the skin or to enhance the efficacy of the aesthetic treatments that are going to follow as well?
Absolutely, yes, and even the healing process. So a lot of patients as well, we're going to do a thread lift, which is the closest as surgical.
It's a bit more involved.
When it comes to a non-surgical facelift, neck lift, we'll suggest sometimes to either do it before or after. Sometimes people do it both, and I think you're gonna get always a boost of immune system. Energy levels are going to improve as well, and you get a really nice skin glow, especially with high strength of glutathione and vitamin C.
I think the immunity right now is definitely something that everybody probably really wants to amplify as well, right? So I'm sure that's a really popular one in your clinic right now.
It is, yeah. I think always winter time after Christmas, everyone is going more for like the injectable size, looking fresh and looking great before Christmas, and now it's more the hydration and resurfacing skin, the energy boost, the immune system as well, because everyone has been unwell, whether it's cold, flu, COVID, etc.
Everyone was unwell over Christmas, I swear, exactly. We're going to be beating a path to your clinic. I'd finally love to touch on the thread lifting that you mentioned, because I think threads do get a bit of a bad rep, but they are evidently a huge passion of yours, and you do some very sort of subtle, very beautiful work. I mean, how do you go about sort of empowering the patient who chooses to go down that route and make them feel that they are going to have a result that is subtle and natural and in keeping with, I guess, their own anatomy, so that they recognise themselves and feel happy with their reflection?
Sure. So I think that's the main idea of threads. It's not a surgical facelift that we know. Over the years, they will have to obviously cut an incision, remove the skin and tight, lift the skin. The threads is more about repositioning the tissue. So as we age, we lose volume, especially on the mid face. Lower face becomes a little bit heavier. We develop the jowls, etc. The idea of the threads is to insert them under the skin at a specific depth and then reposition that tissue. We can get up to 2 centimeters of lifting, potentially, in an ideal case. Not everyone is suitable, of course.
That's what I was about to ask you. I mean,
Yes.
it's obviously dependent on your underlying anatomy, but also your skin type, right?
Absolutely. So that's why it's very important for us to have a consultation face-to-face. So even sometimes people say, oh, can I have a FaceTime and then come in? No, I really need to see the skin and feel it, pinch it, see the quality of the skin, see how much they need of lifting, or also their expectations. Because I think when it comes to anything that involves lifting, people expect a full-on facelift. And
Exactly, wind tunnel.
exactly. So I would say to patients, if you want a good 80% improvement, then yes. If you want more than that, then go for a surgical.
Then it's surgery. But I mean, often you do see people who have come straight out of a thread lift and everything is pulled tight and they do look very elevated, but it does drop a tiny bit, doesn't it?
It
And it sort of
does.
relaxes and integrates
Yes.
with the tissues a bit more.
Absolutely. So it always feels extremely tight. And I think even at the consultation, I spend the time to tell patients what to expect and how it's going to feel. Because they always say, oh, lift as much as you can. And you finish the treatment, they're
And
like,
it
oh my
turns
God,
out-
it feels too tight. Are you sure it's not going to be too much? I said, no, it's going to relapse a tiny bit. And again, the idea of the threads is to keep it very natural because
Yeah.
we're not really cutting anything of the skin.
Mm.
But it also stimulates collagen, so I think they get this really nice skin texture and the glow.
Yeah, they do say that the collagen naturally sort of wraps itself around the threads in the sort of face as well over time, so that by the time the threads have dissolved, there's a sort of internal framework of collagen that's keeping the face in place. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. So the thread is, I use personally some threads called Silhouette Soft, the extra brand. So they're made of polyglycolic and polylactic acid. So they're both going to stimulate collagen, especially type 1, which is the one we want for rejuvenation. And within normally like 6 to 8 weeks, it's finished doing all that stimulation of collagen. By the time the threads are broken down within the skin, that keeps the skin in place.
And how long, anecdotally, have you actually seen a thread lift benefit a patient for? When somebody says to you, how long is this actually going to last me for?
Manufacturer says 18 to 24 months. I think it really depends again on the patient's skin quality, the aftercare, what they do in between when you do the treatment and when they come back, skincare products, sunblock, whether they drink a lot of alcohol, no, lifestyle. So I think all of that will obviously cause more benefit or
Sounds like January is actually a great time to have a thread lift. No sun, no alcohol. I mean, that definitely doesn't seem
Dry
the case
January.
tonight.
But
so
yeah, I
dry in
think
here,
it
though.
really depends on the patient, right? But from my own experience doing threads for about 11 years now, I would say most patients will come back within the 18 months. And if they come sometimes a little bit sooner than that, we end up doing less threads than we originally did because it's more about maintaining now the results instead of letting it completely go and
Yeah.
then restart.
And I guess also that's sort of part and parcel of going on that journey with the patient as well, isn't it? You sort of develop that relationship, they come back, probably they do a little less next time, maybe they add other things in. But I know as somebody who has sort of been to your clinic and seen how you work that you take a lot of time with patients. And I think that's really important when we're sort of pursuing procedures that might not initially feel all that comfortable for us to do.
Yes, I think it's important to have the time with the patient and really understand who they are, what they're trying to achieve, why they're doing or why they want the treatment, particularly in that time. Sometimes because they're going through a divorce, sometimes they've lost their job, they want to feel more confident. So I think the psychology side of it is very important. It's key to understand why patients are looking for the treatment at that particular time in life.
I totally agree, and I think all three of you are probably sort of part-time psychologists as much as you are dermatologists, aesthetic doctors, and oculoplastic surgeons. Yeah, I mean, it's you're part artist, part psychologist, and many other wonderful things, I'm sure. But Pam, that was really interesting. Thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you.
Psychiatrist, psychologist, you can be all of them, life coach. So our final speaker is Professor Jonathan Roos. I think he wants to say something.
Bernard, I just wanted to ask if I could pick up on something, because the advantage of sitting at the end is I get to listen to my esteemed colleagues first. And
We don't even have to go through my questions. You can just, freestyle.
I was just gonna say, I'm so impressed and grateful that you guys are all here, because you've given up your evening to come and hear us speak. And education is so important. And it just struck me because I was listening to us use the word patient, but you're not patients, right? You're just normal people who want to look healthy and feel your best and look your best and go about your lives. And some people say that we should use the word client or customer, but the reason we as doctors use the word patient, it's not actually for you, it's for us. Because the technologies we're talking about are really powerful. I put knives into people's faces. Firaz fires, lasers at people, and we're putting in these potentially very dangerous things, both through the veins with infusions and in terms of implants, in terms of threads. And so the reason we use the word patient is to remind us that we can do a lot of harm and that you don't know as much as we do about this stuff. And so it's on us, the onus is on us to look after you and not to look after ourselves. And that's why we refer to you as patients, because there's that caring element.
That's exactly what I was about to say. I was going to say the positive side of that is that actually it denotes a side of caring and the oath that you took to always put the patient and their best interests ahead of everything that you do. And I think aesthetics can sometimes be a bit of a grey area as well, because these aren't necessarily medical treatments that we need, particularly when we're talking about things like injectables and thread lifts and eye surgery, which may or may not be sort of medically necessary. But I think sometimes you have to remember at the end of the day, your patient is a human being, and you have to
that's why
understand them.
I don't think you should be offended when we use or feel alienated by the fact that we use the word patient, but you're not actually patients. It's just to help remind us that we have to put always your interests first, and that's what we all do. And we've all been doing this for decades, and so it becomes second nature. But every once in a while it isn't, and there are unscrupulous people. And I think the one thing that probably unites all of us is that often in medicine, less is more. You don't need massive interventions to look better and feel better. And I think one of the things that I was hoping to speak to you about tonight, Fran, was some of the, I think maybe later we'll just touch on Botox. And Botox is something that's very common. Most people in this room may already have had it. But Botox can affect your psyche. It can affect your ability to have orgasms. It can affect your ability to...
Jonathan, you're giving away the entire talk. Can I ask some questions, please? I'm joking. But maybe before we get into Botox and orgasms, because this is actually relevant to what Jonathan does as a professor of surgery and a very expert aesthetic doctor in his own right. Maybe you can just set the scene with eyes, because this is really you know everything there is to know about eyes as an oculoplastic surgeon. So just start by briefly explaining to us what happens to the underlying anatomy of the eye area, because then I'd love to know why things like toxin are actually so relevant to it.
Yeah, so if I could just go back 10 million years, if we're all Homo sapiens, but if we go back, we had relatives who were Homo erectus, Homo australopithecus, Homo africaniensis. There are lots of different types of homos, as in humans. And if you look at what's happened over evolutionary time, our foreheads used to be quite flat, and they have started becoming more and more prominent, and that's continuing throughout evolution. And the reason for that is that we use expression to communicate. And eye tracking studies, so if we look at where people look when they meet, if I meet you, for example, and we look where my eyes go, they will go between your eyes, backwards and forwards. They'll go down to your mouth just to check whether there's a smile or a snarl, and then it'll go back to the eyes. And particularly this area, the eyebrows, are they lifted? Are they angry? And we communicate so much. And it's also how we assess each other for youth. So we look for lines, we look for tiredness, we look for droopy lids. And so in human evolution, this area is absolutely key to how we interact with each other and how we feel about ourselves. And that's why I chose to become an oculoplastic surgeon, because it is the most important part of the face for communication. It is the most important part for aging, and it feeds into all the other parts. And interestingly, just one last thing, I don't know how many of you have pets, but if you look at dogs, so we've done these eye tracking studies on dogs as well, and lions and chimpanzees. And when chimpanzees or lions or dogs look at a human face, they don't look at the eyes. So we look at our dog, oh, he's so cute, hello, hello. And they look up at us. But they're not looking at our eyes, they're looking all over, and it's almost random. So they have not developed that same sense of analyzing. We think they do. And we think, oh, he's raising his eyebrows, he's looking, oh, he's good, sir, oh, he's so cute. But actually, they are not seeing what we're seeing. And they've learned to mimic, or they've learned to imitate, to get what they want from us by doing certain things.
That's fascinating, actually. I didn't realise that, but I know exactly what you were talking about when you say the eyes go back and forth between the eyes and the nose and the mouth. It's the triangle of beauty, isn't it, that we sort of often talk about?
Is that why it's called the beauty
triangle? Ka-ching. It's like I planted that one. You guys are so good to me tonight. Yeah, exactly. But it's interesting that that's only humans. I mean, and interesting that you sort of talk about the evolution of humans and how the forehead has changed, because also what happens, obviously, as time goes by is that the bone starts to reabsorb and the fat starts to shift and the skin becomes thinner. So it's sort of working for us and against us all at the same time, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, we used to die younger. So I guess to our forebears, this wasn't such a problem. But now we are living to a ripe old age, and 50 is the new 30, and I think I still feel like a teenager. So, I think that's why it's becoming more important for us. to look our best, because inside we are still, we're not getting married at 15 and having kids at 16 or earlier. We're getting married when we're 35, 40. We're having kids when we're 45. We're having the peak of our career at the age of 60. We don't plan on, retire. The world has just changed, and that's why Ratcha and I, for instance, feel that what we do is so important, because we're helping people stay where they feel they should be, rather than what society says. Oh, you look tired, you should probably retire. Oh, you don't look up for this job, you probably shouldn't go for that promotion. We make lots of value judgments all the time, and most of them are totally non-fact based. And this happens to everyone. It happens to doctors, and that's why the advent of AI is actually quite exciting, because it's going to take away some of these prejudices.
I totally agree. That's very fascinating. Tell us a little bit about the sort of negative emotions that the eyes can actually impart, though. Excuse me, because you mentioned a little bit of this at the beginning. But often we can look sad, we can look tired, we can look unhappy, even when we don't feel that way. And I'd love to sort of know what work you both do together at Face Restoration that can actually help improve the appearance of the eyes, so that we feel more confident when we look at ourselves in the mirror.
Yeah, so as we age, lots of things happen slowly and gradually. And it starts right at the most basic level. So it starts with the bone, and we get a bit of bone resorption. Our orbital sockets get bigger. The bone resorbs, so it gets thinner. And then above that, we have some tissue like muscle and fat. That starts to atrophy. The ligaments and suspensory ligaments that hold those fat cushions in place start to descend. And a lot of it starts around the eyes. So we have, just below the eye here, we have something called the malar fat pad. And that starts to descend. And as that descends, it gives you a nasolabial fold. And that gives you a marionette line. And that gives you jowling. And so everything moves down. But the good news is that it doesn't take a huge amount to undo that, because it's so small and so gradual. And we as humans, we've evolved to pick these things up, because we're for better or worse, we have these two ways of thinking, fast and slow. So we have a really good analytical, long-term, really thinking about things, and then we have the snap judgments. Snap judgments are key, because we can't spend all our time thinking about every single thing. So we have to have certain prejudices, but sometimes those are wrong, and that's when we really need to analyze what we do. And we make a lot of judgments about how people look, and these small descents will communicate tiredness, they will communicate boredom. If you get hooded lids, people will assume that you're not that interested in whatever they're saying. And so the power of these technologies is that they can reverse these things through not too much effort.
And I think the power of the eye area in general is it's often the first area, going back to a beauty triangle analogy, that people meet. I once spoke to a surgeon who said, when people meet you, they meet your eyes. He was actually a breast surgeon, and he said to me, if you ever have any surgical operation done, get your eyes done. And I actually think it's fascinating, because it genuinely is the first thing we see in the mirror. It's what the world around us sees, and so it's definitely something to address. But if we are starting to notice these tiny little changes creeping in, the fine lines, the slipping of the malar fat pad, the puffiness, what are the things we can do sort of in a quick and sort of relatively straightforward way to sort of fix that?
So I don't think we should do anything quickly. I think it's really important to address things not as, I want this done, I want one big operation, it's going to sort everything, I'm going to be great. You haven't aged that way. You haven't aged quickly. And so often restoring it is not a one-shot, it's not a one-trick pony sort of operation. In general, you have to address things in a slow, nice way. So you have to think about using the right modality for the right thing. If you have lost volume, you might need replenishment of that volume. If you've had descent, you might need to weaken the down-pulling muscles to help things move upwards. If you've got really wrinkly skin, you might need to go to Firas to have a resurfacing to tighten up that skin. You might need some microneedling to get things, the collagen restarted. And if there's a lot of loose skin, and if my colleagues can't help you, you might need to come to us, and we might then consider doing specially placed filler, to correct dark circles around the eyes, which can create these negative, tired emotions. Having said that, and I'm just keen to get on to this, but it's these technologies are powerful, right? So you can affect your psyche, and so that's why it's so important to go to the right practitioner. And I'm not trying to sell us, but of course I am. But you don't want too much done at once, because it can really negatively affect things. So there were studies done, for example, if you give Botox in the crow's feet, we don't like these, laughter lines too much. But if you give the right amount of Botox, you will look happier, things will lift up, you will feel happier, the reflection you see in the mirror will be happier, you will reflect more happily and portray yourself better. If you have too much Botox, you'll get a flattened effect. And interestingly, when we say flattened effect, it means that you don't have all the lines, which means that your ability to communicate is reduced. But interestingly, the science shows it also reduces our ability to feel emotions. And so, for instance, there was a study done where people had Botox before, and they measured the orgasm satisfaction scale, whatever it was called, FFSI or something, and then after Botox. And invariably, if you had Botox down here, it didn't have an effect. But if you had Botox up here, and it reduced your ability to mimic and make certain expressions, your orgasm satisfaction went down.
And so why is this is because of the eye contact, right? This is what you're sort of going back to, the sort of connection with other people who we might be meeting. That's why it's important that it's not in the eye area.
In that particular study, it was even because some of us do it in the dark, so it's not always about looking at the other person. And as we age, the darkness is a great thing. But
that's why we're here.
But it's sometimes it's actually about making a certain face can make you feel a certain way. And this is another really interesting part of science.
It's like power posing, but for facial expressions.
Yeah. So this is a really interesting thing, which is a bit complicated to explain, but I'll do my best. So if I look at you, for example, you would think that if I smile, then it will make you feel happy, and you will smile back, and that will make me feel happy. But in actual fact, that's not what happens. It's the other way around. If I smile at you, before you feel an emotion, will actually mimic my smile. And your brain then feels what the muscles has done and gets that emotion. And this is absolutely solid science, and I can go through all the different papers that shows this. But that is why, if you weaken somebody's smiling muscles, even if I'm smiling at you, if you've had Botox and you can't smile, you can't mimic easily, your emotions that you feel will be flattened. And that's why, even though Botox is marketed by Allergan as a treatment potentially for depression, in actual fact, it can also cause depression because it can flatten your emotions.
It goes to show it's such a delicate balance, because you're right, I know there's so much data about the sort of the link between toxin and happiness, and we sometimes say, yes, Botox can make you happier because it stops you from being able to frown. But actually I think it's really important what you've said. You've also got to be really mindful not to blunt or sort of really prohibit those positive emotions, and that's obviously a very positive emotion.
The only reason we're bringing this up is because all the art on here is if you've noticed, is extremely suggestive. Fran chooses her locations with care.
I hadn't even noticed it. It was you that pointed it out when we first arrived, Jonathan. I know everyone's going to be looking around at the photo frames now.
Sorry, I think I got us off on the wrong tangent. I'll behave now.
No, it's absolutely fine. A laugh is always good. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing to make the patient feel a little bit more confident ahead of these procedures that you're doing, whether they're non-surgical or surgical, because actually the sharp end of what you do is pretty sharp. And I think there's quite a lot that can often make the patient feel anxious when pursuing things like the surgical eyelids, the blepharoplasties, everything else that you do. So what do you do to make them feel back in control of that journey?
Well, we try. Surgeons should not want to operate. You should always try to avoid big things, and if you can get away with something small, that's great. So we always have a gradual approach. We don't just rush people into surgery. But Rachel and I are quite unusual. We do all our surgery under local anesthetic. And at first that might freak people out until they realize that when you do things under general anesthetic, the surgeon may not bother to put any local in. And in that point, you actually experience all the discomfort that you're just not able to remember it afterwards, which is not great. So good surgeons, even if they're doing a general, will still use local anesthetic. Rachel and I do things with people awake, and we chat to them because we like people, and it's possible to do these operations. And we give them confidence, and we're always trying to improve what we do. So one thing we do is we prepare them. We use certain tablets. Some of these are little trade secrets. We have recently started playing, we used to play ABBA because I'm Swedish, and we used to play ABBA in the theater, but what we found is we've now started playing A-wave music, and these are tones that affect your brainwaves, and they create this sort of calm atmosphere in the patient and in the surgeons actually. And so things become very kind of boring, monotonous, calm, and effective. And so we also use
as long as that doesn't make it sort of boring and monotonous for you, I suppose, being the surgeon.
No, but you want surgery to be boring. If surgery's exciting, something's going wrong, right? So you want a very bored surgeon, and Rachel and I are terribly bored all the time. The other thing we do is we use smells. So one of the oldest parts of the brain, again in evolution, is the rhinocortex, which is the bit, which is the nose. It's the smelling part. Because before we had eyes, before we could look at things, we would smell things and we'd head off in that direction like little amoebae. And smells can be incredibly powerful in reminding us about somebody we're missing, somebody we used to love. They can be incredibly powerful. You smell somebody's perfume you knew 20 years ago and the emotions just come back. And so we always use smell in our clinic room because to associate it with calm, we use one that I picked up from my local yoga studio, and it's just a really nice calming thing. And so we have the alpha waves, we talk, we basically
It's engaging with all human senses, which actually sounds like the last thing almost you're doing in the theatre, but it's wonderful.
You just reminded me, all the senses. And in fact, I'm coming across like the perv of the year now.
God, what now?
But one thing that we do is we use a vibrator. So there's great science. There's actually a Nobel Prize for this. We have different nerve fibers in our body. We have certain ones that are for pain and temperature, and then we have other ones that are for knowing where your body is in space and vibration. And if you probably know this, you can stub your toe against something and you know you've stubbed it before the pain comes. Or you can touch a hot plate and you know you've touched it before you feel the heat. And that's because the heat and the pain is transferred through older fibers, which are smaller and less effective. And so that signal takes longer. And so if you sting yourself, for example, on nettles, you might rub yourself, you might blow on it to make it feel better. And that's because when you have pain, if you activate the other system, the vibration sense, your brain ignores the pain and the temperature. And the reason is if you're being attacked by a tiger, it's more important to know where the tiger is or what it's pulling on than that it's actually hurting. You can worry about the hurting later. And so one thing we do is we use vibrators all the time. We've done a few operations today, everyone got a vibrator. And so even when we do Botox, we use a vibrator.
And is that for the patient to hold and sort of position it and distract
so
themselves?
As the needle goes in, we apply the vibrator. And the reason is that the brain is then, it's thinking it's going to feel pain. But in fact, the stimulation of the vibration is so much stronger that the brain goes, oh, what's vibrating?
It completely distracts you.
And it distracts the brain. And it actually doesn't even happen in the brain. It happens lower down. There are certain reflex arcs where the message will get blocked. So there's it's like a gate. And if the vibration is working, the pain gate is closed, so you can't feel it. And that's why blowing on things works, rubbing on things. Oh, that hurt.
What an interesting concept. I mean, it really does go to show that you've really thought about every single possible step of the procedure and what a patient might need.
Well, this is not just me. So one of the strengths of working with Rachel as a team is that we spend all our time talking about things. How can we make this better? How can we make that better? And if you have, I think when you go into private practice, it's very easy for doctors to get lonely, get isolated, and they sit there and they think they're doing the best thing, but they don't actually know. And when you work with somebody else, you're a team. Teams will always, in the long run, outperform individuals, and a diverse team like Rachel and me will always outperform a monolithic team. So if I got another me, it wouldn't be as good as getting me and Rachel.
Two of you. Goodness. That was meant in with the absolute.
That was meant with love.
I can't even get the words out exactly. Jonathan, that was really, really fascinating, and everything you had to say was very eye-opening and not at all what I expected. Sorry?
Did we get through the questions?
No, I think we went completely off the questions, but that's also fine. I think it was more interesting to chat to you about what you had to say. So thank you, and a fascinating insight into what it is that you do at Face Restoration. I think that's brought us to the end of our sort of one-to-ones with the panelists. We do have a little bit of time for some audience Q&A, but I think just the one thing for me that resonates actually listening to the three of you speakers is how each of you have really taken some interesting steps to get to know your patients before you actually start doing treatments with them. And I think that's exactly what this field of medicine is all about. There is a huge amount of soul searching and really taking the time to understand who it is that sat in front of you, seeing them as a human being, because we're here to talk about skin and self-esteem, and actually the two are so closely linked that in order to address someone's self-esteem, their skin is going to come into play, and vice versa. To really make somebody feel confident in their skin, you need to be really keeping a close eye on what's going on beneath the surface. So a big thank you to you for all of your input and wisdom. Were there any questions from the audience for any of our wonderful speakers? Yes, lady in front.
Mr. Laser,
Mr. Laser.
Oh, that's a new title.
Mr. Laser.
So I see loads of different new lasers coming up all the time, new names popping out. Do you use like original lasers? Are you always like going on to the new thing? And I suppose it's that thing of almost like always wanting the next, the newest thing. Is that necessarily
Isn't it
better,
better?
or are you better to stick to the old stuff?
Okay, that's a very good question because many of my patients ask the same questions. So let me explain briefly what lasers are. In essence, they are light-based technology. So just like you have a light bulb, so there is a wavelength, a speed which light travels with. It's a specific wavelength and the speeds. And you have in the what we call the electromagnetic spectrum different wavelengths. So that's why we will have different lasers because there are different targets within the skin. So for example, if we look at the bloods, so if you're treating anything with blood vessels, there are specific wavelengths, so speed of light, that will be absorbed by the blood vessels and it will target them. So we need to have those wavelengths. If we look at pigment, likewise, there are specific wavelengths that will really act on the pigment. So first of all, there will going to be different wavelengths and therefore different lasers for different applications. But the explosion over the last few years with all these different lasers and manufacturers is purely because of the growth in the market and the competition. So many companies will try and compete against an existing company. So they will come up with a new laser that it's probably slightly manufactured differently, might have some specific features like a lightweight arm, it might fire the laser a bit faster, it might have some specific method of cooling the skin, but it's not, if you look exactly at what we call the wavelength and how it will work, there are only so many wavelengths that you can choose from. So I would say there are probably about 6 to 8 base laser wavelengths, and everything else that you see is just a variation of it, just like cars. You have different companies that manufacture different cars, and that's purely because there is demand.
How many lasers do you have out of interest that you would regularly be using?
So probably about
Quick count.
nine in total. And that is because, again, pigment needs some lasers, vascular needs some lasers. Again, are you looking at something deep and something superficial? Tissue such as skin, if you want to tighten that requires a different laser.
But
So-
is there also the argument that actually it's about the skill of the person wielding the laser and
Yeah,
not just the
absolutely.
device?
Absolutely, because, and that's again very important, because what many of these companies are trying to do are trying to essentially sell lasers. And they're trying to sell lasers to the mass market. So therefore, they'll try and make it as easy as possible. So they will say, well, it's very easy, we can just show you how to do it, and you just follow these steps and you'll do that. But that takes away the skill of the operator. It takes away how you read the skin, the interaction, the tightening, what we call the clinical endpoint, which is absolutely important. This is why I so often see laser treatments that went wrong because they're following a specific step. And you see over the years, I have seen companies that come and go. They come up with something new, and then it just survives a few years, and then it disappears. So don't read too much into that. Sometimes there's a little bit of over
Yeah, I think you
hype
get
and
suckered in thinking.
Yeah, and you get
"This is
marketing
better, it
and-
must be better."
well,
Don't we all?
you get someone who is very famous who then posts something, this laser is amazing, and then everyone believes that is the case.
But I think that's why you have to have a practitioner who you trust, who you can actually ask these questions to and be like, is this new? Is it all a load of, hot noise right now, or is there something better?
I agree, and I mean another thing which I actually generally find it upsetting is there is this perception that things that are done in the NHS are backwards and that's old-fashioned and that's not the right way, and things that are done in the private sector is the right way of doing things. Where in fact, if you look at, for example, lasers, because this is a field that I do know about, if you look at lasers and how hospitals will purchase a laser, they have to go through a very rigorous process looking exactly at the evidence, where there's clinical evidence, randomized control trials, how safe that, and is there actually proof and evidence that this laser works. And this is why you'll see many of the, let's say, old-fashioned traditional lasers in NHS hospitals. And patients will think, well, that's old-fashioned and that's from 10 years ago. But that's actually because it's so safe and has such high level of evidence. So it's not always that what's new and fancy necessarily is what's better.
It's interesting though, even as a journalist, sometimes I get a press release land in my inbox and it's like brand new laser, you know, for example, and I'll speak to somebody like Fraz and go, wow, have you heard about this? And you might even just say to me, oh, it's the old version of this, it's just been repackaged.
Yeah,
They've
exactly.
just put it in a new machine. Like it's, yeah, you've got to obviously read into what goes on behind the scenes, and that's
Well,
difficult as a consumer
Well,
sometimes.
I'll give you one example. There's a laser company called Candela. So in 1982, they started with a wavelength which is 577. So 577 nanometer are going to be in the yellow-orange range of light, okay, as a color. And now everyone's talking about a yellow laser. Oh, have you heard of this German company is making a yellow laser, which is exactly what was there 40 years ago. But it's just a new name, it's a new package. But if you actually know what you're talking about, niacinamide is another example. Niacinamide is one of the cheapest drugs, which is called nicotinamide, which, if you look at many of the old-fashioned handwritten dermatology notes, we give nicotinamide 1 gram for blistering diseases, and it causes some flushing. But there are some dermatological conditions where nicotinamide has been used, and now suddenly niacinamide is this wonder drug. But it existed for many years ago, but it's just repackaged and became fancy, and it's
It's had a good
presented to the
PR
market.
spin, hasn't
so,
it?
Yeah, so just be careful, do a little bit of research, balanced research, and just ask
And
the,
ask.
the right person, really.
I mean, not every effective light treatment is a laser. There's IPL.
Yes. And phototherapy, for example. So if you have, for example, psoriasis or eczema, like that's available in the NHS where you go stand in a cabin of light. So that's light-based therapy. It's not necessarily a laser because it's not a single wavelength, but it has medicinal effect. And so not every laser is cosmetic, there's the light-based technology that can be in the cosmetic sector, but also in the medical sector.
Can I just add? I mean, the sun is a very helpful thing. We all know that if we go out into the sun, we get better. Our skin can improve. We go on holiday. It's great. The advantage of these machines is that we have filters so that you don't get the bad part of the sun, the bit that causes melanoma. You don't get the UV light. You don't get the far infrared. And so it's like we're using the sun, but we're limiting the bad things. And that's why you don't go on holiday. You go see Firas instead.
But you can't give us
For
a
the
sense
same
of
amount of money.
But let's. So the sun is really bad for the skin. We agree on that. But it has lots of other fantastic things.
But it's great for
obviously.
the mood.
It's great for
And
the
this
mood.
is about skin and
It's great,
self-esteem.
it's great for the mood. It's great for vitamin D.
Vitamin D,
But it's also
exactly.
been shown to enhance nitric oxide, and nitric oxide also relaxes the blood pressure and improves the lifestyle. And there was a study in France that looked at the north and the south and the consumption of wine. And actually people who drink just one glass of wine live a bit longer and have less heart disease. So it's, and sun exposure. So the sun exposure on its own is bad for the skin, but it has many other medicinal benefits, including fighting depression and feeling better in terms of mood.
Gosh, so Botox and getting in the sun could just be the absolute recipe for January. Yeah, exactly.
And a glass of wine.
And a glass of wine. Wonderful. Were there any other questions in our audience? If there are no questions, then we'll have plenty of time for you guys to all catch up afterwards as well. I think you'll probably all stick around for a bit, won't you?
I just wanted to mention about the supplements and the intravenous. It's interesting because there's also a link with some of the conditions that we talked about.
Okay.
So glutathione, for example. Glutathione is a powerful antioxidant that's been shown to be suppressed and reduced when patients have very severe active melasma and hyperpigmentation. So this is why it's often seen as the brightening infusion. When you're given glutathione, it's very common in Asia, the skin complexion brightens and you get less. And that is because there is an inverse correlation between melasma severity and hyperpigmentation with glutathione. Because when you have low levels of glutathione, the melanocyte is under stress, and that stress increases melanogenesis. When you replenish the levels of glutathione, so the levels of glutathione go up, then there is less stress on the melanocyte, and that's why it slows down with the melanin production. So that's one element. The other one that you mentioned about is the vitamin B12. And again, there's a correlation between these two, because it's been found that low levels of vitamin B12 will also suppress glutathione levels. And when you replenish vitamin B12, the glutathione levels increase
Such
as
a
well.
delicate dance when you're looking at all of these.
And this is why
additives.
I don't know if you notice or not with patients, but if you have hyperpigmentation around the eyes, hyperpigmentation around the mouth, you can also look at B12 deficiency, because many of, like in India, for example, it's standard practice for those patients with hyperpigmentation around the mouth and the eyes. They always check for B12 levels, because low levels of B12 can also be associated with pigmentation around these areas. So they're all linked.
It's an interesting point how much you can determine about the underlying health of the patient through just looking at their skin.
Absolutely. And then vitamin C. Vitamin C is obviously now again very popular topically. Everyone is talking about topical vitamin C, but it's a very important cofactor for the proline collagen synthesis. This is why the sailors in the past all had scurvy and broken less collagen, because they didn't have vitamin C, because we always rely on external supplementation of vitamin C. We, Homo sapiens, cannot produce vitamin C. But vitamin C is also very essential. So if someone is undergoing, for example, resurfacing, and they really need neocollagenesis, supplementation with 1 gram of vitamin C, for example, has also been shown to help with the recovery on the neocollagenesis.
I use a vitamin C serum every morning. I mean, it's such a great antioxidant.
Yeah, I'm talking about oral in this case.
Oh yeah. I know,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying in general, sort of the vitamin C sort of across the board is very powerful if we sort of think about getting it through all these different modalities. Jonathan.
Can I just share one just quick interesting fact, because we've heard collagen mentioned a few times. The white part of your eye is made of exactly the same stuff as the clear part of the eye where the colored bit is. It's just arranged differently, and I think that's such a beautiful model of how complex the body is. You've got the exact same substance making up this really opaque white stuff and this clear stuff, and it all has to do with the orientation. So, it's just the body's fascinating.
It really is, and my mind is always blown when I listen to all three of you sort of speak about all these things that you do. I learn so much actually just sitting here and sort of soaking up all of your wisdom. Was there a question at the back?
You mentioned collagen. What are your opinions on collagen supplements?
This question comes up in every panel we do. I kid you not. Yeah, it's fascinating.
I'll hand over to my
Yeah,
colleague
Pam,
who's,
what are your thoughts as somebody who's really into the
I'll give you
supplementation?
my opinion. I think well, obviously I'm very much into the evidence and where is the evidence, so I'm not there yet with that level of evidence that really satisfies me. But I think it's not so much that you actually get a collagen that you swallow and that collagen exactly, but it's more of these cofactors that will then stimulate the neocollagenesis process. That I understand and I agree with. And vitamin C supplementation is one example. When you're taking vitamin C, that's going to help with the collagen production. But if you're actually getting chunks of collagen and you swallow that I haven't seen yet the level of evidence that will really
Chunks of
get me
collagen.
to be so confident. Well,
I think there are different
if I
delivery
advise a patient, I need
mechanisms.
to be very confident.
Of course.
But I'll hand over this.
Yes,
because then
Pam,
you'll
what are
be
your
in a better
thoughts?
position.
No, of course. I mean, I agree with Professor. I'm also into evidence-based with any treatment we offer or any supplement. But it's true that there is different types of collagen in the market, and I think you need to look at the source. Some of them are marine collagen, and they tend to give more stomach issues and allergies potentially. And then you have porcine, so from pork or sheep, and they tend to be better absorption for humans. But I think what really makes the collagen supplement better is the other ingredients are combined with. So collagen on its own is not going to necessarily be absorbed the same way. So there will be certain ingredients that work in.
Which are the ones we should be looking out for that work synergistically?
So they work synergistically, exactly. So I normally would recommend one called Totally Derma, which is powder, and it's got a series of amino acids, glutathione, hyaluronic acid. So it's a good combination of ingredients, zinc, and so on. And there's clinical trials that show definitely improvement. But I think the problem with collagen supplements, people expect just to rejuvenate and look 10 years younger. And I think they forget that we're talking about collagen not just for the skin, but for the joints as well, ligaments and so on. So again, there is some of them that I will recommend over the others, but still I think we're not there yet. I agree with Firas.
Can I ask, what about trying to get it through your nutritional intake? Like if you sort of did bone broths and things along those lines, would that sort of be of benefit?
Yeah, and I think funny enough to extent, my mom actually makes her broth from bones,
chicken
right?
bones,
From chicken, yeah. And beef, and actually you probably get more collagen from that.
And far
so
cheaper as well.
All the school, yeah, and cheaper. But yeah, I'll pass it on to Jonathan.
I was just going to say, you know, if you eat a steak, there's plenty of collagen in there, and it doesn't suddenly rejuvenate your skin massively. So I agree with Firas that probably the evidence is not that strong. There is some suggestion that if there are collagen breakdown products in the gut, that will stimulate your own body to produce, so you'll get this process of neocollagenesis, so new collagen lay down. I think what we probably agree on is that what's more helpful is to create this local microtrauma that causes collagen synthesis, and that's where microneedling can be hugely powerful. And we also use a product from Allergan called Harmonica, which is a combination of calcium hydroxyapatite and hyaluronic acid, and the little calcium particles cause the fibroblast to adhere around them, and they start laying out collagen. And there's very strong evidence that you will get a skin tightening and an improvement. So, you know, if I look at my belly after a few steaks and, you know, bad living over Christmas, it definitely hasn't, you know, improved the collagen synthesis there. So I would stick with the microneedling and the harmonicas and things.
The biostimulators. Miss Lady here.
Hi. I was going to ask you, I've actually got two questions, but one's relatively quick. Glutathione has been mentioned quite a bit. I've taken it as a supplement, but is there any risk of like overdoing it? Because it's sort of one of the things that you've mentioned in lots of different kind of products.
Up to 1,000 milligram is fine.
Okay, cool. Because I know it's there, like
For
the
severe
medical thing as
pigmentation,
well.
2,000 milligram for, let's say, 6 weeks, I'll accept that. But up to 1,000 milligram. But the problem with oral glutathione is very poorly body absorbed.
Yeah.
So it has to be the liposomal
Yeah.
one. So if it's a liposomal one, 1,000 milligrams is a gram, it's fine.
Okay. And then the second question is, starting out in the world of cosmetics and obviously the further you get towards surgery, obviously you guys clearly highly recommend it being here, but how do you recommend sort of starting that journey if you've just got maybe some mildly problematic skin
Well,
but mild
I
early
think,
stage?
Francesca, you'll be in the best place of... are you talking about training or,
No,
or,
well,
or
like
finding...
actually-
No, it's as in finding the right
Yeah,
practitioner.
finding the right practitioner.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's sort of key, in fact, and that's one of the reasons that we
While my
started
colleagues
doing
gather
these
their
talks
thoughts,
to introduce you.
While my colleagues gather their thoughts, I think prevention is always better than cure. And so you don't want to get to a point where you want to have lots of interventions. It's much better to do small things early which prevent or slow down the aging process. So for someone like you who's so young, a little bit of Botox would be enough to stop those down-pulling muscles. We've already got gravity working on all of us, but we also have down-pulling muscles like platysma. And if we can weaken some of those, your face will move up slightly, it'll take longer to get heavy. And studies have shown, there are powerful twin studies and also longitudinal long-term studies, that if you have regular Botox, let's say 3 times a year, your brow will go up just that much, which means you won't need a brow lift later. Any hooding of the eyelids is going to be much less. Your skin quality is going to be much better, so you can save that money and not see Firas, just see me. And so, but there are lots of things. So prevention is always better. And all these questions you're asking about antioxidants and improving the skin, and we haven't even talked about SPF, but that's again something Firas and I will agree with.
Oh,
It's
but that's
really
given,
important.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you know, prevention better than cure.
But I think all of these things start with the conversation, and I think it's finding somebody that you feel comfortable and, you know, that you really trust them as well, and asking their expertise, and sort of having that two-way partnership is really important.
I think this is really important. And I tell patients this, you need to, Dr. Sabrina Shah-Desai, who we all know,
Hi,
and is
Sergey.
colleague of yours, she also says that we emit certain waves, okay, wavelengths and waves, and the patients also. And there's something that's called energy. Dr. Wasim Taktuk is
Big on energy.
often talks about energy. You need to connect, and that it's not necessarily have to, you know, like the person, but there needs to be mutual trust. You know, in whatever the practitioner is saying. So this trust is really important. And the things that went wrong, or patients who were unsatisfied, if I look back, they were always the patients who just didn't find the trust from the start. So it's really important that you trust the person, because to get to the end point where you want, it can be a very bumpy journey. You might have some complications temporarily, some side effects. And if there is no trust, then suddenly it's like, oh, he's done something wrong, and oh my God. And
You need
know.
someone who's going to have your back.
Exactly, and you need someone who you can rely on to go and say, well, there is this problem. How can you solve it? I think for me, it's very important.
And I think it's also important not to shop around. You know, I often hear this from practitioners as well, and I understand, because obviously everybody has something new and exciting and they're doing it differently and it's better, and come to them and they've got the special offer going on. But I really believe that the most natural, sustainable, long-term results come from going on that long-term journey with somebody who you really trust and who knows you. I mean, I've been seeing the same injector for probably 8 years now, and she has photos of my face. You know, I look very different sort of 8 years ago, and it's sort of terrifying. But equally, at the same time, I trust that she is keeping a very close eye on exactly how my face is changing, and she's not doing anything out of the ordinary. She's just maintaining it and keeping it where it needs to be. So I think sometimes having those long-term relationships and really cultivating that pays dividends for you as well.
Yeah, I think it's building the relationship, and it start from, like we we're just saying, a skincare, even just to get your skin in a good condition, sunscreen, SPF daily, even if it's rainy, cloudy, because at the end of the day, it's preventative as well, right? And by the time you get to injectables and so on, it's still less is more, little treatments. But for us, it's understanding also the aging process. So we know what's happening with the bone, the muscles, the skin, and so on. So every layer of the skin we need to target at some point, and making always subtle, natural results. And of course, when there is no other choice, then there's surgery as well. But yeah, it's kind of like going along that path of like the aesthetic journey, and like for us, it's just finding the right person that you trust and you feel confident with. They are knowledgeable, they have the experience, and they're always updated.
So with that, it's not necessarily the number of Instagram followers. No, seriously. So the one thing I can confidently say is that the number of Instagram followers doesn't correlate with expertise and skill.
Really?
Well, from my own research.
Can I just add, because it was a good question and it deserves a serious answer. And I think you want to go to somebody who doesn't just do one thing. If you go see a surgeon, they will only offer you surgery. But you also don't want to go to somebody who does everything, because if they do everything, they probably won't do all of it to the best of their ability. So the way we've structured our clinic, for example, is we concentrate on the periocular area. But within that area, we will do Botox, fillers, we will do microneedling, we will do surgery, we will do IPL, we will do laser resurfacing. But we don't do things outside our area of expertise, because we're consultant ophthalmologists. So, you know, we shouldn't be, and we don't need to, and it's not the right thing. So you kind of want somebody who does the right tools for the right job, and in general, less is more, and prevention is better than cure.
Thank you, everyone. I think there was one question I have to go to at the back, because otherwise I'm going to lose track of the order of these questions. Yes.
This is for Jonathan. Back to Botox and sex. If you're saying that studies show that not being able to move your muscles around your forehead and your eyes gives a lesser sexual enjoyment, but at the same time we know that because you can't move those muscles, you can't frown, so therefore that makes you happier. What's the sweet spot? If that's not
Finding the right injector. Oh yeah, good pun.
baby Botox or something?
Yeah, so it's about getting the dosage right. So if you are frozen, and it's a good question, and there's obviously a happy medium. And the problem with these studies is that when you do a scientific study, you're not answering every question. You're designing a study to answer a question, one question, and that's a good study. Problem is that then you have 10 different studies, and they're all answering one question, but you're asking an overall synthesis of that information. And that's something where we have to extrapolate from the published literature. And so we do know that if you treat here and here too much, that will reduce enjoyment. We also know that if you treat some of the muscles that are down pulling, like we talked about before, that can make you happier, because it's easier for you to mimic the smiles that you see. And we also know that if you treat them too much, it can cause depression because you cannot mimic the smiles that you see, and therefore you don't feel the enjoyment. It even goes so far, some of these studies have shown that if you're reading a novel, if there's a straightforward passage which just has some facts in it, whether you've had Botox or not doesn't affect how quickly you read that. But when you come to an emotional passage in that book, if you've had Botox, your reading rate slows down. And that's really fascinating. Again, super strong evidence.
You're full of fascinating facts. Sorry, I'm going to come to you and then we're going to go to you next. What was your question?
My question is, if you see a practitioner for having work done, but they don't offer an expertise in either lasers or surgery, how do you kind of knit it all together? Because if you're it's a bit like, you know, you're shopping for an outfit and you think, well, actually, I want my shoes from here, and I want my coat from here, and I want my bag from here. But you've got this one person that kind of understands you and has seen you through the ages. You know, like
You get to a point and suddenly you've exhausted what they can give you and you need the next stage.
Not so much that. You know you're always going to go back for, let's say, microneedling or, you know, toxin or dermal fillers or skin boosters, but you want surgery. You know, would you then, I'm just saying, like, I kind of feel, would I be frightened to say to my injector, oh, is it okay if I go off and have some surgery? And are you okay to share the relevant note? Or, like, would the surgeon know? Like, it's just about being transparent. I wouldn't want to hide what I've had, because
But often I think patients would have that conversation with, you know, say their injector, for example, and I know many great injectors, I'm sure, Pam, you do this, who you go, actually, I'll be honest, I think probably we've gone as far as we can with this particular treatment, and I'm going to refer you on to a colleague who I really trust who can take you on from here. Would you agree, Pam?
Yeah, I agree. A lot of patients, because they feel confident with your work, sometimes they'll ask you, Pam, I'm considering having a blepharoplasty, who we recommend. And of course, like, there's certain people that, because I know their work and I've sent and referred patients before, and I have the feedback from patients as well, I'm happy to always put them in touch and do a referral. And most surgeons will keep you also updated with whatever's happened from the consultation to if the patient goes ahead with surgery. They send you a letter and they tell you exactly what they've done, referring the patient back to you, and they will recommend, okay, don't do any injectables for 2 months or whatever. So I think it's nice to have that communication and that relationship with other colleagues, because again, I'm not obviously going to do any plastic surgery for them, or if I need the dermatologist side of things, I really recommend Firas. Or if they ask me for, I don't know, sometimes things are not even related to cosmetic work, I'm always happy to have, you know, that blacklist and people that you also trust, and I'll always recommend someone that I'll be happy to send even my mum or go myself. So I think over the years you meet people, we meet colleagues all the time, and I think that's why networking is great. And with certain people, again, you connect, you work in a very similar way, and it's always about cross-referral.
And collaboration every time.
And I think this model of having a clinic, for example, the Tech2 clinic, for example, talking about Dr. Wasim, I know he's not here, but he's established the right model of clinic where he has different expertise, so from dermatologist to Dr. Pam, we have another colleague, Dr. Christine, and also someone who specializes in migraines and headaches, will allow for us to even just communicate with each other. So you'll often come and say, is this patient suitable for laser? And I'll say no. And
you
that
can lean on one
saves-
another as
and
well.
that saves the patient from wasting their time and coming and going seeking opinion, because they're getting an honest opinion. So I think just like the collaboration, you also have teamwork is really important, and having a clinic or a doctor who works part of a team is very reassuring.
I agree, Jonathan.
Yeah, just to echo those thoughts, you know, the best practitioners will generally be popular in their community. They will have lots of links with other people, and they don't want to do things that they're not the best at, because ideally they should want what's best for you. And it requires a little bit of insight, but you know, you want to have strong links with colleagues, and to have a genuine expertise. And like Rachna sits on the faculty of Allergan's medical board, for example, and so she's the only oculoplastic surgeon there. But you know, that provides a huge network of people to refer to who are general surgeons, who are laser specialists. You know, we have all kinds of people, and I think it's that's why, you know, and also this beauty triangle. I've met lots of lovely people through the beauty triangle. So
That's nice to hear, Jonathan. Was there a question over here?
I just wanted to ask, how did you gain experience in the field that you're doing? Like, I'm a medical student and I really want to specialize in dermatology, so any advice would be really appreciated.
For
Well,
us?
if you want to specialize in dermatology, my advice would be is to seek the formal specialist training. So in the UK, the way it works is once you complete a certain number of years working as a junior doctor, then you go into what's called specialist training. So the specialist training takes 4 years. It is competitive in dermatology, but just like many of the other specialties. So if you really want to specialize in dermatology, my advice would be to go down that route. So in the UK, you will have to have something called the MRCP, which is a set of exams after you do your junior training, which is about 4 years, and then you go for specialist training in dermatology. If you then want to specialize in lasers, what I did is I did a fellowship for a year at Guy's and St Thomas Hospital, so you will seek then a fellowship in a subspecialty afterwards.
Or speak to Faraz, who knows everything about specialising in lasers. I think we'll probably have to pull an end to the conversation of questions there, but all of our speakers will be around a little longer if you do have any more questions for them. I think all that's left for me to say, first and foremost, is a huge thank you to all of our amazing Beauty Triangle panellists who have been fascinating. Secondly, to the 22 for hosting us so beautifully. This is such a beautiful and escapist venue for a cold January evening, so thank you to the 22 for hosting us so beautifully. And finally, to all of you as well, thank you for coming out tonight and sharing your January evening with us. It's been such a pleasure to have so many of you here. Come again. We'd love to have you at more talks and events. In fact, we have our first ever Beauty Triangle Festival happening next weekend. I know some of you have already signed up, which is very exciting, but there's a little bit more information in your goodie bags, and it will be fantastic to fully immerse you in the wonderful world of aesthetics and wellbeing there at 180 Health Club. So yeah, hope to see more of you soon, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye.